A long time ago, about 20 years to be exact, I was living in a flat full of Peruvian girls. This was in my Madrid days. I had found the place by putting a classified ad in a newspaper called Segunda Mano. For a few euros, you could text them 20 words or something, and the next day your ad would run in the paper. I did this back in 2005 and received a few phone calls. The flat was in the center of Madrid, just beside Puente de Segovia, and it wasn't terrible. It was decorated in Spanish granny style. The rent on the room was about 250 euros a month, and of the indeterminate number of Peruvian girls who lived there, at least one was pretty nice. I say there was an indeterminate number of Peruvian girls because their cousins and friends would move in and out from time to time, and it wasn't clear at any given moment who was living there and who was just hanging out. Everything went well for several months. I was 22 and working in a language school in Puerta del Sol. The flat was close enough that I could walk up the hill and across Plaza Mayor to get to work at 9 a.m. Europe. I was truly living the life. Then one of the girls moved her aunt into our little flat. There must have been several things that annoyed me about the aunt, but the only one that stuck in my mind for the last 20 years is that she would always call me El Gringo. I would ask her to stop. Por favor, no me llames gringo. But she'd say something along the lines of, Te llamo gringo porque eres gringo, y punto. I'm calling you a gringo because you're a gringo, and that's all there is to it. My mental response to this was something like, Listen, lady, in my part of the world we've got words for people like you too. Would you like to hear them? But I didn't have enough Spanish to produce a sentence of that length, so I held my tongue. This went on for a couple of months. Summer came, and I was seasonally unemployed. But a guy I knew from hanging out at the cheap student bars in Lavapiés was leaving his rented room for a while. He had said that he also lived in Lavapiés, but when I went down to see the place, I found it was actually several blocks beyond Embajadores. In Delicias, in other words. That was disappointing. I had dreamed of spending the summer living in Bohemian heaven, dating a series of German university exchange students, and being able to invite them back to my place in Lavapiés. Oh well, back then Delicias didn't have the glamour it does now. But I decided to move in anyway. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to Spain to Go, the best podcast in the entire multiverse for all things Spain. This is episode 98, and we're going to talk about the word gringo, the word American, the number of continents. You might think there's an obvious, simple answer to this question, but there's not. And much, much more. I would like to give a shout out to Tiffany in Madrid. She just calls herself Tiffany in Madrid over at my donation page, expatmadrid.com/donate. Tiffany in Madrid says, expat, living in Spain and loving it for all the reasons you mentioned. Thank you very much, Tiffany, for your donation. Tiffany has sent some money along. The donation page at expatmadrid.com/donate is a great place to get started supporting this podcast if you would like. I have the article that Tiffany is referring to. It is called Why Do Americans Love Spain? And it is episode 70 of this podcast. I made it early last year. Why do Americans love Spain? I talk about the differences in culture that make Spain such a nice place to live for a lot of people from the US. However, I just used the word Americans there. And not everybody is in agreement that that is the correct word to use. Anyway, thanks, Tiffany, and let's get to it. Because while there were certainly other factors involved in this decision, at least half of the reason why I moved out of my flat with the Peruvian girls was because I didn't like this woman calling me gringo. Was I being too sensitive about the word gringo? Maybe. Maybe it's just a description, like calling someone Italian or Mexican. But I didn't like it, or at least I didn't like the way this woman was saying it. Of course, this was long before the term microaggressions was in the common parlance. In my day, we just assumed people were assholes, and that was it. But I would soon find myself on another side of this issue in my dealings with leftist types from Spain and Latin America, because they would sometimes take offense at my use of the word American. America is a whole continent, they would say, not a country. If you are American, then what is someone from Colombia? In my innocence, I would answer, why, South American, of course. Yankee imperialist, how dare you? Latin people didn't like that at all. So wait, is America a continent or two continents? As it turns out, a lot of people in the world don't believe in South America, per se. They believe in America, and they think that dividing the continent in two at Panama is just a product of gringo racism. In fact, there's no consensus on how many continents exist at all. When I was a kid in school back in Arizona, the answer to how many continents are there was clearly 7. Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, North America, South America, and Antarctica. If I had answered anything else on a geography test, I would have been wrong. But a lot of people out there believe in 6 or even 5 continents: Europe, Asia, Africa, Oceania, and America. North and South America are all one continent, according to this theory, and at least for the 5-continent people, Antarctica doesn't count. We might have occasionally said the Americas in my town when talking about North and South, as well as the islands of the Caribbean, but that was mostly in the context of European exploration centuries ago. The 7-continent model was, I thought, unquestionably true. But, as I found out here in Spain, the story of the continents is more complex than my 3rd-grade social studies teacher ever let on. So how many continents are there, anyway? The continents don't exist in nature. I mean, the land masses do, but the concept of dividing land masses into continents is, dare I say it, a social construct. I know. I'm as exhausted as anyone else by hearing that various things are social constructs. But in the case of continents, it happens to be true. Who decides what's a continent and what's not? The Greeks are the ones who first divided their world between Europe, Asia, and Libya. Back then, they thought the Aegean Sea was the center of the world. Libya is what they called North Africa. It was considered a bit arbitrary by some, even in those days, to divide one landmass into 3 separate continents, but the concept stuck, and today, Turkey is considered to be Asia, while Greece is Europe, and Egypt is Africa. People who believe in the 5-continent model will say that the Panama Canal is a human construction, not some dividing line between 2 separate continents. But in that case, so is the Suez Canal that divides Africa from Asia. And who decided that the Ural Mountains were the edge of Europe anyway? Seems pretty arbitrary. There's no law of physics saying that Asia begins to the east of the Urals. But people love clinging to their archaic social constructs. In 20 years in Spain, I haven't convinced anybody that Europe doesn't really exist. That, if anything, it's just a peninsula on the western side of Asia. But back to the word American. Why do people from the US call themselves Americans? Well, these days I usually tell people I'm from the United States, especially when I'm speaking Spanish. But a much younger me once made a video attempting to explain why Americans use the word American to describe themselves. That's on YouTube. I don't know, you can go to my blog and find it in the context of this article. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that the younger me sat down at an Airbnb in Lisbon, fresh off a series of rather depressing breakups, and distracted himself with the project of becoming YouTube famous. The basic argument from the video about why people from the US call themselves Americans and their country America is as follows. 1. The word American comes from the United States of America. America is just a shorter form. 2. In English, that's just the standard way of speaking. In Spanish, they say estadounidense, and that's great. But in English, we don't have another word, so the word is American. 3. Mexico is officially Estados Unidos Mexicanos, and they call themselves Mexicans. Seems like we should be able to call ourselves Americans following their lead. On the surface, it seems that the name United States of America is a bit different than a lot of other country names. It's not so much a name as a description. On the other hand, if you look at Wikipedia, most countries also have a longer official name. The People's Republic of China, the Federal Republic of Germany, La República Bolivariana de Venezuela. There's even, for example, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We call them British. Spain can be called El Reino de España, but officially it's just España. The word reino, also known as kingdom, doesn't appear anywhere in the Constitution of 1978, as far as I can tell. But of course, the king does. Anyway, nobody's insisting that people from the Dominican Republic call themselves Dominican Republicans, or that people from the Oriental Republic of Uruguay call themselves, Oriental Republic of Uruguayans. But I've got dozens and dozens of angry comments on my video where people were and still are pissed at me for suggesting that American is just a normal word to use. At the very least, they call me ignorant, if not racist, for using normal English words. All this has come up again recently because U.S. President, or maybe American President, Donald Trump, has signed an executive order entitled Restoring Names That Honor American Greatness, which changes the official name of the body of water formerly known as the Gulf of Mexico. It is now, as you have surely heard, the Gulf of America. I figured that a lot of the people who have been screaming, "America is a continent, not a country," at me for the last few decades would be on board with this change. But they're not. A poll I did on Instagram showed that most people favor the name Gulf of Mexico, even though the Gulf is right in the middle of America, the continent. Now, a lot of people will just rabidly oppose anything that Trump says on principle, but I think Gulf of America seems a bit more inclusive, given that it also has shores in the US and in Cuba. Who's with me? Before we end today, I'd like to talk about gringos, guiris, and Yankees. Here in Spain, the word gringo isn't very common, and a lot of Latin people have no problem with the word American. The ones who do are usually just looking for an argument. These days here in Barcelona, I'm much more likely to be called El Guiri. As I explained in another article and another episode of the podcast, that's way back in episode 15, the word Guiri refers to pale-skinned people from the north of Europe, the United States, Canada, places like that. It's not usually offensive. It seems like it's usually said with a lot more cariño than gringo, for example. Another thing, and this one really pisses me off, is the slogan, "Yankee Go Home." This has been in Spain for a long time. It's a result of some debates about NATO bases and the U.S. Navy base down in Andalusia. I don't know. I don't care much about people's beef with the naval base in Rota, but I do have a problem with Spanish people using Yankee as a synonym for American. Yankees are people from the north. I'm from Arizona, as I mentioned, and to quote the polite phrasing on Wikipedia, in the southern United States, Yankee is a derisive term which refers to all northerners. Therefore, I do not personally identify as a Yankee and do not appreciate being called Yankee. Maybe things were different in your town, but when I was growing up, we had a healthy suspicion of northerners and people from back east. We thought they considered themselves to be our moral and cultural superiors. Many years later, the coastal elites are still giving off that same vibe, to be honest, but whatever, that's not really the topic of this article. In any case, I find it fascinating that something as basic as the number of continents is up for debate. One of the most interesting things about living abroad is that you'll probably find that a lot of what you considered to be reality is just a social construct. The continent under your feet may seem real as the 744 genders, but in fact it's only a collective agreement between members of a culture, and other cultures might have a few objections to your narrow worldview. One of the big arguments people like to make is, who gave you the right to use the word American? I say argument because people use it as if it were an argument. It actually means nothing as far as I can tell, because the answer is nobody did and nobody needs to. I don't need permission from all 600 million people south of the Rio Grande to use a word, and neither do you. Policing the vocabulary selection of complete strangers has always seemed a bit pointless to me. At best, they'll decide you're not capable of intelligent conversation and walk away. At worst, you'll create long-term resentment. Just don't call me gringo. That's about all I've got for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Episode 15 actually deals with the word giri as well as the expat versus immigrant debate. I see a lot of people on Facebook saying, I'm an American expat, and someone will chime in and say, the correct word is immigrant. Okay, immigrant, whatever you want. I talk about my personal feelings about those words, and I try to decide if there's a real difference between expat and immigrant, and basically there's not. But you can check it out, episode 15. I'm on YouTube. Look for Learn Spanish with Daniel over there on YouTube. There are about 50 Spanish videos, as well as some travel stuff from around Spain. I've got a new one up about my recent bike tour adventure over in Extremadura. You can go check that one out, or just go over to biketourinspain.com and sign up for a bike tour. It's great. I highly recommend it. We are almost at episode 100 here. That's quite a milestone, I guess. I'm working on some other ideas for new Spain content, so, be patient, and I'll have those out in the next few weeks. I turned off all the news notifications on my phone, and I've been super relaxed because I'm not hearing anything about the news, and I also find that I don't even think about the fact that there might be something going on in the news that I need to know about. If it's there, I pay attention, but if it's not there, I just don't care. So that's an interesting experiment. I don't want to say I recommend you stop reading the news, but you might want to stop reading the news if it's stressing you out. It's been kind of a strange few months for a lot of people around here and over in the US, of course. You can, as I said, donate any amount of money, starting at €3, I believe, on my donations page, expatmadrid.com/donate. While you're there, send me a message about what you would like to hear about in a future episode. I will, try to help out if I can. I can't, do any topic because I'm just a boring old married guy who lives in Barcelona, but I will try. expatmadrid.com/donate. You can also just go to expatmadrid.com, enter your email address somewhere on there so you can get my updates when I have a new episode, new article, etc. I don't really have much to sell you. I will eventually mention, for example, taxesforexpats.com. You can go to taxesforexpats.com if you identify as an immigrant or an expat. It doesn't matter. The U.S. really, really wants to keep track of what we're all doing when we're abroad, so I just pay taxes for expats money to take care of that. I'll put a link in the show notes where I think you'll get a $25 discount or something if you file your tax return. I've been using them for several years. I like them. Anyway, I get a little bit of money if you sign up for Taxes for Expats using my link. In any case, I do highly recommend getting professional help with your taxes if you're living between two countries, because otherwise it could just be difficult, stressful, and expensive in ways that are completely avoidable. So link to Taxes for Expats in the show notes. Other than that, not much to say. I hope you have a great day wherever you are, and we'll be back soon with episode 99. Thanks for listening. Hasta la próxima.